3, 4.
Welcome to Off Panel, Sketch.com's weekly podcast. This week's show is another special edition from Emerald City ComiCon as I spoke with Deadly Class artist Wes Craig about his work. So Wes, we're on day 3 of Emerald City ComiCon. How's your con going so far?
It's good. It's going really good, actually. It's kind of a good pace, you know. Like it's not super hectic where I've got a lineup of so many people. I'm not sure when I'm going to be able to run to the washroom or something.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also not like the worst case scenario convention thing where you're just staring at the walls and have that hopeless look on your face where you're just hoping one person will come to your table. You know, it's like kind of like people are coming up, and then I have a little breath for a second, then people come up and repeat, basically. So that's a nice handleable level for me. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One of the things as listeners won't know, when I first came up to your table, I was cosplaying as J. Jonah Jameson. So I had a very unique experience. I got to actually watch you in action, and it was great being able to see you talk to somebody who hadn't experienced Deadly Class before, and like, you know, talk to fans. Like, is that pretty, or talk to somebody who had never experienced it before? But
Yeah.
is it pretty exciting to actually get like the face-to-face interaction with the people who have been reading the book from the beginning, or even like the people who haven't read it but like could potentially be interested?
Yeah, I find it, you know, like when I get the like, what's this book about, and
Mm-hmm.
I gotta give the pitch. That's a little tough because I'm like, I've really given this pitch like you know, you feel
A
like
million
you've given it a million
times.
times, and you're like, how can I, you know, when you repeat at conventions, you repeat yourself a lot, basically,
Sure.
because you can't think of an original thing to say every single time, and but
Mhm.
you get asked a lot of the same questions, so you got to come up with your spiel, basically, you know. But people that come up and that are like, you know, I've heard good things about the book, whatever, they've heard the basic concept of it or something. I love that, you know. That's amazing because then I don't have to give the pitch, but we can just talk about more details of the story or whatever, you know. And people that are fans they're so, I don't know, I've found them to be so nice and really kind of like glowing with just with love for the comic and
Mhm.
stuff, you know. It's just you can't help but be, it's like ego flattering, but I mean it's just nice. Like, I mean, also the fans just are just generally speaking are super nice people. It's just nice talking to them and seeing, it's a trip to see how much enjoyment they get out of it, you know.
Well, and that's one thing I've actually talked to several artists about here is that, you know, you're an artist, you work like tons of hours working on in isolation on your
Yeah,
work.
exactly.
So being able to get out and like kind of hear that is definitely, it's got to be, like I was talking to Fiona Staples about this, about Saga. Like she's like, there's a huge disconnect between, you know, getting Eisner Awards and like, you know, it's selling really well on the internet and stuff like that, and then actually getting the face to face because she's so busy drawing the book that she doesn't really have time to take that in.
Yeah, it's it's a kind of a surreal experience because it's like you come here, well, yeah, like you sit at home and you draw all day and you don't really talk. I don't work out of a studio. I work from home, so it's like generally, except for when I go for coffee or a beer with some buddies or something like that. I work at home and I don't talk to anybody until my wife gets home from work.
Right.
I talk to my dogs more than I talk to like other human beings, generally speaking, because I take them for a walk and that's what I do, you know. And then all of a sudden you come to a convention and it's like the exact opposite.
It's a
You have to be
deluge.
very like outgoing, and you have to turn from an introvert to an extrovert, and it's kind of strange. But at the same time, if you're able to do that, it's kind of nice to play both roles and kind of do that in that way, you know, to be able to, now it's time to be like the outgoing Wes, you know, or something. It's kind of strange. But again, like the fans' appreciation and excitement, it really kind of helps you stay excited while you're at the convention, you know. It can be very draining. Like when I first started going to conventions, and I didn't do anything yet that people knew or whatever, and I'd just be sitting there and no one would be coming by. That's a very disheartening experience, you know. So, but once you get on a thing that's recognized and appreciated, it's really very, like I said, very ego flattering.
Yeah.
It's strange because people they come up and they're like, oh my god, you know, they're so excited to see you, and it's such a strange experience. It makes it very real, and all the, you know, like snark that you see on the internet about, you know, not even about your own stuff, but the general snarkiness of the internet.
Sure.
It's like, you don't see any, you know, all you see at conventions are just excited people that love reading comics, you know, and they are not, you know, some of them people don't even get into the the behind the scene politics or
Sure.
rumor mill or any of that stuff. They just read the comics and they stay away from that stuff on the internet, which is probably the healthiest way to be. Like you can check out the stuff online, obviously, if you're super into it. But yeah, just some of the snark stuff can get, it can get tiring after a while. So yeah, but here I find it's a very positive experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you said you work from home, right?
Yeah.
So what is your setup like? I'm trying to remember. Do you work traditionally, or do you do work
Yeah,
traditionally, don't you?
Yeah, yeah.
So what is your, let's say you get Rick's script in, okay? And do you get pretty in depth in reading it first? Like, what's your process for bringing an issue to life?
Yeah, well, Rick will call me up generally, and we'll talk out the story for the upcoming strip that he's about to write.
So is it like you talk out an arc first, or do you talk out issue by issue?
We talk out an arc in general, and like one. I mean, it's not exactly like
Right.
military style, like regimented or whatever.
Right.
But I mean, we talk out generally the arc, and then we'll get more specific on each story just before he writes each script. Like we know where we want to go basically, and how are we going to get there is the second conversation to be had. And generally speaking, he just really enjoys like walking through the story and kind of seeing what reactions he gets out of his artists and stuff like that, and sees what hits and sees where I'm maybe not reacting. Even though sometimes I find he'll say something to me, and I'll just be like, my face will be like, "Oh, that's crazy," but I won't say anything, and I'll be like, "Oh, he thinks that wasn't like hitting with me, but it is,"
Yeah.
Like explain that because we don't do Skype, we just do it by phone.
Right.
But anyway, yeah. So we talk that out, and if there's like a scene that's not quite there yet or whatever, we can talk out stuff and I'll feed him some ideas, or maybe I'll say one thing that'll kind of spark his imagination on where it should go, and that helps a lot because once I get the script, I feel very like invested and I feel like it's a real collaboration. And then he gives me the script. The script is broken down into panels, but I don't have to necessarily. He knows that I like kind of messing with the panels and doing, making things smaller, making things bigger, whatever, doing my own things. So
Yeah, and creating motion in the page and stuff like that.
yeah, if I have certain scenes, I really have ideas for like what can make it, just trying to make it original in whatever way I can. Like a lot of people that are fans of the work talk about like the chase scene from the first issue. Like
Sure.
I had a lot of ideas for what would make a cool chase scene in a comic book, so he kind of let me go off in my own crazy direction with that, and we used more pages than we should have just because I needed space to make that chase scene work. But yeah, so he gives me the script, and the dialogue is just kind of rough dialogue. He does the full final polish on the dialogue like after he sees the artwork,
Sure.
because he wants to see like what's happening. Sometimes you don't need the dialogue. Sometimes the facial expression is enough, or maybe you need to add more and be a bit more descriptive if my storytelling wasn't clear enough, or whatever the case may be. So yeah, so I get the script. I read it over a few times because I really want to. Yeah, I want to really feel it. Feel the emotions. I want to lock into like what am I trying to get? What are the characters' emotions, and what do I want? What do we want the reader to feel right now?
Sure.
And then I go into thumbnails, and I send Rick the thumbnails. I pencil and ink them, which is silly, and it takes way too much time, and I should do them digitally or something. But that's just how I do it.
Yeah.
Pencil and ink them, so silly. Why do I do that? Every time I do it, I'm like, you're inking your roughs. For people that don't know, it's like their thumbnails are tiny little.
Oh, you pencil and ink your roughs.
Yeah.
Oh wow. I thought you were talking about the full page. I'm like,
no,
that doesn't seem that ridiculous.
I pencil them, which is fine. You got to pencil them, but it's like I ink them too because I really have to know where the blacks are and stuff like that. The inking is when the storytelling really kind of happens on the page.
Right.
So I just have to have them black and white. To explain to people that don't know, thumbnails are just tiny. They call them thumbnails because they should be like the size of a thumbnail. They're a lot bigger than that, but they're very tiny, tiny versions of the page that I do. And the reason you do them so small is that you don't worry, you don't get bogged down in details and stuff like that. You just do the boldest. It has to be clear at a tiny, tiny little size, or else your storytelling and being clear about what's happening is not going to work on your final version of the page.
It's kind of like the choreography stage almost. Like it's kind of like I know a lot of people are super rough with them, and then they like just kind of work out the general motions, and then they kind of work out the details on the page, on the final page.
Yeah, I think it's always best that way. I think also for writers, they want to work out, you want to have a big a spine of the story figured out. That's the reason why it's called the spine. I mean, you want to have it very clear and strong. And if that's not working, there's all these different metaphors. The
Mm-hmm.
foundation of the house has to be strong, or else it'll fall down. You know, that's the basis what you're working on,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the same way in life drawing. You know, like when you're doing like you're drawing a nude in life drawing, you have to get the general sweep of the motion first before you worry about fingers and noses and all that kind of stuff. You got to make sure it's strong from its base. So that's what the thumbnails do. They make sure that everything's in place, and then you can worry about your cute little details that you add in for texture and stuff.
Mm-hmm. So I was actually going to ask you. So, like, I know Rick's part of like Deadly Class is a very personal story for Rick, and like,
sure.
and he's written in the back, all about how like especially during the arc where they went to Vegas, like part of what happened to Marcus was something that happened similarly to him.
Yeah.
But you were talking about how. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's interesting because that's something that that's the one thing, like people that get them in trades, they don't see the
letters column.
The letters column, and Rick, like every issue, writes something about that stuff, and that's something that he shared in the single issues where some of that experience in Las Vegas was like based on a lot of crazy stuff that he went through. But I noticed that because I've talked to people that just collect the trades, and they're unaware that that's like based on some real life stuff.
I know.
It's just interesting. Yeah.
It was funny. I was reading that, and I just remember being like, "Damn, Rick had a crazy life."
Pretty crazy. Yeah. When he started, that was like one of the first stories that he told me. He told me a bunch of like we were just kind of comparing notes on like crazy teenage year hijinks. And I was like, wow, that's a good one. We should use that.
We should work that in there. But you were talking about how building like that personal connection, that emotional connection. As an artist to the characters, to like, you may not have similarities in experience to like somebody like Marcus or to like Saya or anybody else.
I'm totally like Saya, like 100%.
Are you actually a ninja?
I'm just a ninja. I'm hiding my Yakuza tattoos right now.
Oh my God, I didn't know that. But when you're doing that, does like building that emotional connection is that like essential for you to be able to understand and bring these characters' personalities to life? Because that's one thing I really appreciate about your art is Marcus carries himself one way, Saya carries herself one way. All the characters, God, I can't remember the name of the evil roommate of Marcus who
F-Face. I'll just call him that.
F-Face. Okay, F-Face.
He has a name, but that's kind of his nickname.
But it's funny because he's like a traditional like nerd. He's like
sorry, Shabnam.
Shabnam.
No, I thought you meant at the
Oh,
the
no.
orphanage,
Oh
the guy
God.
that comes after him with the messed up face.
No,
That's why
no.
It's called F-Face. No, Shabnam is his nerdy roommate. In
yeah.
the school. Yeah.
Yeah. So Shabnam, I mean, he is like the prototypical like forgotten nerd of the class, and he uses that to his own advantage. But at the same time, like the way he carries himself, he has strength in his posture, and he is like somebody who seems like he really believes in himself, and it really comes through in your art. I don't know if that's like me reading too much into it or not.
No, I like that because I'm not sure. It's sometimes you're unaware of what you're doing on the page, and it's like, yeah, I guess that is how I draw him.
Like, especially now when he's like basically running the school,
yeah.
But even before, like you could always tell that there was an edge to him that he wasn't really revealing because it was kind of strategic.
Yeah,
and like it came through in that. But for you, when you're like developing the book and developing the characters and stuff like that, how does that emotional connection with those characters play into your art?
Yeah, well, just one thing on Shabnam, like actually it's true because that character actually is based on a person that I knew in high school.
Oh, really?
And part of not his actions. His actions are based on a person that Rick's knows, but just physically, I'm thinking of this guy that I knew in high school who wasn't like the big nerd of the school or whatever, but like he just fit the role in a certain way. And yeah, he was a smart guy, and he kind of knew he was like one of the smarter people in the school. So maybe that's part of it. He walked around with a certain confidence, a certain ego, where he's like, I might get picked on, but one day you'll all be
looking down upon you.
Like,
yeah,
that kind of thing. But yeah, I think it's like when you see the first episode of a TV show, and you might like it, but you notice that the actors haven't quite nailed down their characters yet.
Sure.
Or you don't even notice at first, but it's like, if you watch the whole season, then you go back to the first episode, they're not quite in character yet, and they haven't quite figured it out. I think that's the same thing it's like the first issue. I went back on it recently and looked at it, and I was like, oh, I don't quite have it yet. The personalities aren't 100% worked out in my head. Like Marcus doesn't quite act like Marcus yet, but as you keep... That's one of the best things about a long form comic book.
You refine it.
You get to know them more and more and more, and you really know like what's going on in their heads.
Mm-hmm.
and you get to kind of lock into that part of your personality that helps you, understand what that character is, and that like when you're feeling like Marcus, you walk a certain way and you talk a certain way, and when you're feeling like Saya, like a badass, you walk very confidently, and like whatever the case may be. So that kind of, yeah, you just kind of get in their headspace, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the most. It's like that's the most important thing, is engaging on that emotional level with the readers. If you can't do that, then it's just forget it.
Mm-hmm.
There's no point. You can do it. I can do my little experimental panels and I can do my cute little things and stuff, but it won't matter unless people are actually engaged in the story.
Yeah, that was I know a lot of people bring up the chase scene in the
Mm-hmm.
first issue because it was a fantastic sequence. But the thing that really stood out to me about the first issue, the part where I really knew I was going to care about this book, is because I'm a very character first reader,
Mm-hmm.
and the sequence where Marcus was thinking about killing himself and
Mm-hmm.
Saya was observing him off, like the way that you use the panels to kind of slowly show, like, him considering it, and
Yeah.
Saya kind of like wanting to say no, don't do it, but she
Yeah.
didn't. I mean, it said so much about it, and like I really like the fact that like there weren't a lot of words to it. It was just like
No.
your art was guiding it, and I think that's really cool. It seems like you and Rick have a good relationship in terms of like flexibility from the script and like using art to tell the story where it's not needed, where words aren't needed.
Yeah, I think he knows when to hold back. He likes to fill he likes to make each issue packed
Mm-hmm.
with stuff, and so do I. So there's like a lot of dialogue when there needs to be a lot of dialogue. But yeah, there are certain moments like, imagine how bad that scene would be if there was just a ton of dialogue. Like it's like you want to almost have it be like you can hear the wind whistling or something
Mm-hmm.
like that, and you can't. You got to let it just be what it is and kind of strip it down if you want that to happen. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
the wind on the bridge as he's like contemplating, committing
Mm-hmm.
suicide or whatever. Um, yeah, I think that works pretty well. It's really important in comics to just let them breathe sometimes. Just let
Right.
certain pages have to breathe, and readers have to take a break. And not even readers have to take a break, but sometimes you don't need to inform the stuff for the reader. Sometimes the best thing is just to let the reader fill in the details, like with their own imagination. That's the
Mm-hmm.
best. That's like one of the best things about comics, is that whole closure thing where you let you let the reader kind of fill in the gaps.
Mm-hmm.
So in cases like that, yeah, you have to kind of pull back on the dialogue and just let the images tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think me and Rick we have faith in each other to do that.
Yeah. I've actually, this has come up in my podcast a few times lately, I think, but I don't remember who told me it the first time. I feel like it might have been Joe Keating, but somebody once upon a time said, um, uh, readers are the final collaborator in comics.
Hmm.
And I think that kind of speaks to what you're talking about there.
Yeah, they make it happen for sure. Well, it's that thing like Scott McCloud's like understanding comics.
Mm-hmm.
It's he does a whole chapter on closure, which is what he calls it. I'm not sure if he pens the term for comics or if it's been borrowed from something else or whatever, but it's just pretty much like that's like the best thing about comics books, because it's like taking advantage. It's like taking advantage of a weakness. Like
Mm-hmm.
the only way we can tell the story is in like a strobe light kind of effect, where we're just giving the major moments, and everything in between is kind of assumed by the reader.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that the best comics, like there's a thing that a lot of people do this, but I'm gonna say like Frank Quietly is the one that stands out in my mind the best. That it's like he'll do a thing where if he's gonna show a superhero, Superman punching someone, like he won't show the punch. He'll show the wind up of the punch,
Mm-hmm.
and he'll show the person hurtling in the air after he's been punched by Superman.
Right.
And it's like, so the actual punch happened in the reader's mind, and that kind of that's my favorite version of that thing. To show the
Mm-hmm.
actual punch, I find never quite works well, because it's like a static medium where there's no actual motion happening on the page. So it like that stuff has to happen in the reader's head for it to make sense. And I find it engages you as a reader to guess at what just happened. Sometimes you might even be a little bit ambiguous about what just happened,
Mm-hmm.
and that's even more interesting. You're like, oh wait, why is that? Why is that person on his ass all of a sudden? You're like, oh, he just got knocked out. I didn't, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
you kind of put the two panels together, so it makes you very, very like, maybe that's frustrating for some people. I like it though,
Mm-hmm.
like I like kind of ambiguity and stuff like that. So, and that kind of really like pulls me in even more into the story.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why people bring up that first chase scene so much is because, that type of, I mean, it's like comics can't achieve like I guess a true motion to it.
No, not at all.
But like that type of like leaving that blank in there allows for your brain. Like one sequence I really liked in I think the most recent issue. I think it was the most recent issue was when Marcus's buddy that has the green hair, Billy, who was getting chased. Like they were kind of like bringing in the bad guys and trying to take them out. That whole sequence, like there was a lot of like kind of assumed motion in there, where your brain was trying to fill that stuff in, and like that sequence worked really well. Like I remember just reading it and like kind of as I was reading it, like it was like I could feel like my brain like mapping it out and figuring it out as it's going along.
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool, and I think that's one of the reasons why your art connects so well is because like you do that quietly thing of creating that assumed motion between those sequence or those moments.
Yeah, I try to do that for sure. I mean, definitely. I'm trying to think of other artists. I always mention. I love his work, but I mean, like I always mention him first because there's a certain, like in All Star Superman, he did that a lot, and it really stuck with me. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna just steal the hell out of that. But there's other artists that Frank Miller also does that really well, and there's a bunch of artists that do that. But that's kind of like there's a few things. There's a few things that comics do really really well, and that's one of them. And I love that kind of that feeling of or focusing in on an element or something like someone's shocked by something, and then you see their face, and then to show the repercussions, you see like a shattered bottle on the ground because they dropped it or something like that. And it's like that's the stuff that's you don't need to show everything that the character does. Sometimes you can just show cause and effect stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing I was going to ask you about is because you did work. I mean, you worked a bit for Marvel before you went over and did Deadly Class and everything, and I know you've done your own work with like Black Hand Comics and everything like that. How much does it differ working on something like? Are you allowed to do those things when you're doing the for hire stuff as much? Like, because it seems like working with Rick and it's, definitely with Black Hand, of course, because it's your own stuff. Yeah. You can really tell the story the way you want it. You want to. Do you have that same freedom elsewhere? I don't know. I'm not trying to make it like something where you're disparaging former employers or something like that. But I'm always curious as to the difference for artists when you're working for hire versus working creator owned.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say, I mean, it's not even like, no disparaging of anyone, but it is on, it's like those are three different levels of how deeply you can get into it. It's like Black Hand, I can completely go crazy on that stuff. For one thing, there's no deadline, so I can really just think the hell out of that, all of that storytelling stuff that I like doing and just make it as good as possible because I can just take my time on it. And also, I'm writing the story, so I can pace out the rhythm exactly how I want and all that kind of stuff. And I have. It's the page structure isn't preordained by somebody else's mind. It's like I know what that page is going to look like.
Sure.
And just it's seamless in that way. So it's the most on that one. And
right.
Deadly Class is like a close second because Rick kind of gives me the freedom to do what I want and kind of stretch out in whatever direction I feel. Not changing the plot, but just changing how we tell that scene.
You don't just send them a page back with Marcus dead or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. They're just all dead. I'm sorry. If you want, I guess you're gonna have to get somebody else.
We need some new characters, I guess.
But I'm not drawing it that way. Yeah, exactly. But Marvel, it's the same. Marvel or DC, it's the same thing. It just depends on the writer and stuff like that. But I was talking with somebody about this last night. With a bunch of guys last night. We were doing a different podcast last night, and they were like, "What's that difference between the two different types of work?" And I don't know why, but for whatever reason, I didn't really do that experimental stuff. Maybe I felt like
you couldn't or something.
Maybe I'm not sure because it's not on them. It was just on me. Like I think part of it. I think I felt like that's what I do best in comics. So it's almost like I didn't want to use that on other people's stuff.
You want to save your flavor for elsewhere.
It's like Mike Mignola, like not like waiting to do Hellboy at like when he could own it. It's like my Hellboy is like my weird panels or something. It's like I wanted to save it. Maybe I'm not sure. I still wonder because I think my career would have. I've seen the reaction of people seem to really dig that part of what I do, and it's like maybe my career would have been gone faster, better, or whatever, or like if I had done that with the Marvel and DC stuff. But whatever. It all happened really. It worked out really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm happy with how it worked out. But yeah, it's funny. I didn't kind of. I started doing that at the very beginning of my career, but I pulled back for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure why, but yeah.
I talked to, and not saying that you're doing this, but I talked to Jonathan Hickman
Mm-hmm.
on a podcast that's going to be airing, I don't know, like this following week from when we're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about how when he first went to Marvel, he was doing, how he does those design break pages and everything.
Yeah.
I really love those, but nobody had ever done that at Marvel before.
Yeah.
And he was just like, we talked about how, sometimes it seems like people who are making comics for like Marvel or DC just do them like the way that has always been done at Marvel and DC.
Yeah.
Not because like they're not capable of something like that, but just because like sometimes that's just the way you approach it because it's the type of job it is.
Yeah.
But not saying you're doing that. I just thought it was kind of an interesting perspective.
Yeah, it's there's relying on the stuff that you loved and the stuff that's been done before, where it's like I'm resting. If you're drawing Spider-Man, you're just going back and being a fanboy and just looking at all the Spider-Man stuff that you loved and kind of like riffing on that instead of thinking of your own interpretation. So you're not bringing that to their characters,
Right.
And also like those characters. I guess you can kind of, it's like it can be a. This is going to sound bad. It can be a crutch for you in a way because the characters can do some, like half the selling of the book is the team, and then the other half of the book is like the character
It's
is
Thor.
selling the book. It's Thor. It's Spider-Man. Everyone knows who those people are.
Mm-hmm.
So they're doing the heavy lifting in certain ways. Maybe not the heavy lifting, but it's a split.
Right.
And it's like when I started doing Deadly Class, there was Rick Remender's the writer. He's a big name writer. He's done some great work for many, many years. So it's like his name is selling the comic a lot, but I also didn't want to be just some guy that like I wanted to feel like I was a 50-50 owner of that book. So and then people didn't really know my name, so I felt like I really needed to earn my spot, and nothing's selling those. There is no Spider-Man or Thor or Superman in that book. It's a new group of people that no one's ever heard of before. So I was like, I have to draw the hell out of this thing.
Yeah.
I really felt like I needed to earn it, So, so I went into my sketchbooks and brought every idea I've ever had for like what could make a cool looking comic and just spilled it all out on Deadly Class. And I think that's helped make me feel like people don't just pick that up for Rick. Like it does seem like a lot of people really do enjoy the art side of it. So so I feel good about that.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, not to downplay Rick or anything like
I'm
that.
not looking for ego flattering statements, but thank you.
I like your stuff. Anyways, but
I mean, I wasn't fishing for
no.
compliments,
I know that, but anyways, but one thing I was going to say is, I know in the first issue there was like that one sequence that was all about Marcus's past and like how his parents died and everything like that. And I know you did some of the colors on that. Like I think it was some of the reds in particular.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Go ahead.
So I was going to say, like, you first worked with Lee Lowridge, and who's the second colorist? I apologize for forgetting.
Jordan Boyd.
Jordan Boyd, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, like, is that something you keep doing? And like, do you continue to work color into your inked or penciled and ink pages at all? And on top of that, is color something you're actively thinking about as you're creating your art? Like, do you think about that before you send it off to Jordan or something like that?
Yeah, the flashback seed is in watercolors. And
Okay.
I just knew that I wanted it to be like super, super minimal. Like it's basically grayscale and reds for when the violence happens in that Marcus flashback. Usually when I use water, like once in a while, there's a flashback where if it's like sunny stuff, like sunny happy memories or whatever
Right.
that turn bad. Usually they're like in watercolor because that's kind of just like a pleasant looking thing to me, So that's like Marcus thinking of better times. And generally speaking, I want to just when I do that, I want the colors to kind of just like hold back and just let the watercolors be what they're going to be, Like
Especially because they're like mood setters.
Yeah, just keep it minimal, But yeah, a lot of the times I don't have an idea for the scene. Sometimes I do, and sometimes I often have ideas for certain panels. Certain panels I just want it to be like, just make this panel red because it's just. Well, what's the point of putting it's the soundtrack of the comics. So sometimes this is just a dun dun like a big bold loud trumpet blast, and this should just be red or white or just something. No, it's not about the color there, or it's not about the texture of the jacket. It's just about a big
Burst.
sound, you know. So you do that with the color. So I have certain ideas. Sometimes the color comes back, and that's the only time I have notes really is when I'm like, no, that last panel is like just red or just nothing, or just almost no color or whatever. Although still you have to keep that in mind with the red or the whatever still has to work within the color scheme of the page and not be. It still has to complement the rest of the colors they're working with, you know. So I'm like, good luck with that. Sorry.
Well, so the last question I have for you is you guys are, you guys are on the 4th volume, right? Or is it the 5th volume?
The 4th volume is coming out in like 2 months.
Okay.
Or 3 months or whatever.
So more or less, I mean, I think it'd be a fair statement to say all hell is breaking loose in the book.
Oh yeah, it's crazy.
It is pretty crazy, and we, as a reader, I don't really know what's going to happen next. But I'm curious, like, you know, now that this is definitely like the longest run you've done on a book, and it's you've been progressing, you've been doing your thing, you've been figuring out things about yourself. How has like working with like the kind of schedule you're working on, it's kind of like a modified version of like the Saga schedule.
Yeah.
Like how has that changed your work, and how have you found efficiencies within your own process to like allow you to still do peak work while fitting into that schedule?
It's
I know it's a kind of a pain. It's a bear.
It is a bear because just drawing an entire just the sheer amount of illustrations. If you just think of each panel as an illustration, it's a lot per month, you know. And that's just that's just how it is, though.
Right.
No matter what you work on. But I do think I'm biased right now because it's the last issue of the arc, and those are always a little bit tight.
Right.
It's like the deadline has finally, at the end of each arc, the deadline has caught up to me again.
Right, because
so it's tight.
When you release the trade, you're already actively working on probably the first issue for the next volume.
Yeah, like I don't stop drawing. It's just we take breaks so that I can catch up with the deadlines.
Right.
You know. So it's like at the beginning, but when I finish this arc, the beautiful, beautiful moment when I end, I'm gonna the last page of the issue, I'm gonna have a nice little break, and then I'm gonna refuel, and then we're gonna start on the first issue of the next arc. And at the beginning of each arc, there's always a nice. That's why I'm saying I'm biased right now. If you asked me 2 weeks from now when I'm
free zone,
vacationing and relaxing and stuff, I'll be like,
everything is beautiful.
It's so easy to do that thing, you know. But yeah, right now I'm just kind of I'm in the last. Like literally, I just got to finish a few more pages when I get back from this convention. So it's really got to be, I got to get to it, you know. But yeah, generally speaking, there's always little things that occur to me every few months or whatever that can speed things up. Because I am like, it's not even a matter of speeding things up, but also just saving your energy and conserving your energy, so that every page can be as good as you can make it, you know. And that you don't get burnt out, because there's nothing. I was going to say there's nothing worse. There's many worse things, but it's annoying to me when I'm burnt out but I still have to do the pages, and I'm just not feeling it. I'm not into it, and it's like a kind of like it's just tough to get through them, which is hard to understand if you're not. It's like I know I'm complaining. There's way worse jobs than that, but I hate. Sometimes you're just like you're drawing panel after panel, and you're like, oh, none of it's turning out good. Like it's just killing me, you know. And it's because you need to take a break, and you need to recharge, and then you come back to it, and you're happy with it again. But sometimes you don't have that opportunity because the thing's got to get drawn, and you got 20 more pages, and you got 10 more days, or you know whatever it is before it's got to get turned in. So that's how it goes.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I was going to say is like. You know, when you're working on a schedule like that, like you don't really have, a lot of times you don't have that time to just like, you're not feeling it today. You can't really turn it off for a day. Like you have to kind of persevere and try to find a way to make it work for you.
Yeah. That's the hard thing to explain. And I swear every day I'm super happy and appreciative that I get to stay in my jogging pants and just like draw all day. It's like it's the best job in the world. But the riding the highs and lows of thinking you're really good at drawing or really good at storytelling, and then thinking you're absolute garbage. That's pretty annoying. And just the idea that some days you just wake up and you just don't want to draw, you know?
Right.
I say that, you know, there's the other part of my brain. I'm like, Wes, some people wake up and they don't want to go to work, but they got to go to work. I know that happens for everybody. It's not just me, you know, but it's hard you can go to a 9 to 5 job and phone it in, and like no one can tell. But like comics, if you phone it in, you can tell, and I'm pretty sure, at least peripherally, the fans can tell, and you
Right.
you have to stay at a very high level of concentration and motivation to make those pages what you want them to be, which
Right.
is hard to do. It's hard to do day in, day out.
Well, especially because, you said earlier, it's like you wanted to make this like a 50-50 thing. You don't want it just to rely on Rick's name. You want it to be, you want to stand out because of your work.
Yeah.
And anyways, I mean, like that makes it difficult. Not that like you would ever phone it in, but that makes it difficult because you do have to make sure that you're on your A game, no matter how you're feeling.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, and also like in terms of that, like trying to find an interesting way to tell the story that hopefully is original and stands out, like the like some of the stuff, whether it be the chase scene or Marcus, tripping out on acid or whatever the case may be.
seeing Mr. T in the
Seeing Mr. T in the slot machine.
Yeah.
Like you need to stay highly motivated, because if I'm not highly motivated, I'm not going to think of those things. I'm just going to do the issue, and I'm just going to tell the story, which is kind of like, that's not what I've set a certain standard of that. And I think that, I think the readers want to get at least a little bit of like an interesting little turn on the general storytelling thing. Like, at least that's what I set for myself, at least like once or twice per issue, I got to do something that's a little bit outside, try to do something that's outside of the box, or do something
like
that's a
the
little
pop
bit
moment.
weird. Yeah, just something strange or whatever, and I really like that chase scene, but it almost bugs me that that's like the first issue, and that's a long time ago now.
And everyone keeps bringing it up.
I gotta find something else that's like just wipes that out, Like, what's that going to be? It's not going to be this last issue, but maybe I'll do something completely insane in the first issue of that next story arc. It's a lot of emotional stuff happening at the end of this issue. So
I imagine
the experimental stuff that I do, or the panel stuff that I do, is totally like backseat compared to like just hitting the readers with the craziness, the crazy emotional stuff that happens. Yeah.
I am sure it will be a very emotional time given where everything is going.
I'm sorry.
Just in advance.
To everyone. I'm sorry for all the things that are about to happen.
Well, thank you so much, Wes. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, everybody out there. Thanks for all the fans, everybody that collects Deadly Class. And I really appreciate it. My voice is running out, so I'll stop talking.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel from Sketch.com. You can find this week's guest, Wes Craig, on Twitter at Wes Craig Comics, on Tumblr at wescraigcomics.tumblr.com, and his work in Deadly Class with Rick Remender at Image Comics. You can find more Sketch content at Sketched, that's SKTCHD.com. Follow us on Twitter at SketchedComic, like us on Facebook at /Sketched, and if you're listening on iTunes, give us a rating or review. Thanks for listening, and tune in later this week for our final episode from Emerald City ComiCon.